Apparently, Joe Biden's team have scheduled frequent breaks during his preparation for this debate. They're trying their best to keep him sharp for this debate against Donald Trump. And the 81-year-old president and his close team have moved to Camp David for intensive practice sessions, gearing up for the first of two crucial debates. How nervous would you be if you worked for Joe Biden right now?
Well, I would have absolutely refused to let him on the debate stage. I would have said, we're not doing it. Make whatever excuse you have to avoid it. But one thing I noticed is that they were able to negotiate something unusual, which is there's going to be two commercial breaks during this 90-minute debate. And that's unusual. Historically, in general election presidential debates in the US, there are no commercial breaks. You just run through for 90 minutes. You'd think the leader of the free world should be able to just speak and answer questions from a podium with a glass of water for an hour and a half. You'd think that'd be no big deal, but they were actually able to negotiate for two commercial breaks and other rules that seem very favorable to Biden. For example, the other person's mic will be turned off while the other is speaking, which stops Trump from getting his jabs in or undercutting or throwing Biden off, which is something Trump's very good at. We saw him famously do that to Hillary Clinton on multiple occasions in 2016. So this debate stage seems to have been skewed to be as favorable as possible to Biden with some unusual accommodations. But I would still be very worried that he's going to refer to himself as a senator, refer to himself as vice president, reference a dead colleague who died years ago as if he's just spoken to them or as if he's just seen them, confuse world leaders that he's recently engaged with for ones that have actually been out of office or dead for years. I'd be very concerned that he'd be going to do that on the debate stage, but I guess it feels like he has to because things aren't going well for him, I guess. He feels behind in a lot of the polls, or that he's got to try to make a case to the people to show them he's not too frail or too old to do the job. So the onus really is on Biden.
I would argue that he's really failing to make that case, though, when there is so much concern around his age and his mental health. The fact that there are breaks in this debate, I think, really doesn't help. It really feeds into the narrative that, no, he's not up to the job.
It definitely does, but only if you know that that's unusual. And I guess because in the presidential primary debates, so the Republican primary and the Democratic primary, they have presidential debates, and it's fairly normal for there to be commercial breaks during those ones. But it's just the general election televised debates where historically there haven't been commercial breaks. So he might be banking on the fact that a lot of people won't notice that. I mean, heck, we have commercial breaks mid American football games here. So people are pretty used to commercials. So I think he's probably hoping that people don't notice that that's actually quite unusual.
Well, we are going to notice if there's another gaffe, which, look, I would put my money on that there probably will be. I don't know how long he can really last speaking until he stumbles and makes a mistake, but we will wait and see tomorrow. How crucial is this debate really when, of course, we know the two candidates so well, Donald Trump and Joe Biden? Is this a debate actually going to change the minds of voters?
Well, the impact of presidential debates is pretty limited, but it's definitely not zero. And the thing is, I think pretty much everyone agrees this is going to, especially with the electoral college system, it could be an incredibly close election. It could come down to just thousands of votes in a handful of swing states, like it famously did for Trump's 2016 victory. So in that kind of an environment where it's so razor thin, a moment from these debates where Biden looks confused or where he mixes up a name or refers to a dead person, which he just does all the time, that could actually hurt him. Whereas a couple months ago or a little while back, he gave a speech for the State of the Union where he was yelling a lot. There was a lot of bizarre substance to it, but he actually was, seemed to be present and alert for the whole thing. And it gave him a little bit of a boost because people were like, hey, okay, maybe he's not as far gone as I thought. If he could have a showing like that, obviously we have no idea, but if there's any way they could get him just for 90 minutes to lock in and seem fully present, maybe that could reassure people who are on the fence about voting for him. But honestly, if I were him, I'd be really concerned.
What are your thoughts on RFK Jr.? Should have he been allowed to join in?
Well, they notoriously make the rules very hard for a third-party candidate to get in because Historically, the people who've made the rules is a committee of Democrats and Republicans who can't agree on much, but can certainly agree that they don't want third-party candidates to be on that debate stage. And look, I disagree with RFK Jr. on many things. I agree with him on a few things. But I think having more voices and more perspectives is a good thing. So I would have liked to see him on the debate stage. I would have liked Americans to know that you don't only have two options this November. There's also going to be Libertarian Party candidates and Green Party candidates. So people do often forget about these options because in many ways, the US electoral system is heavily, heavily skewed by the two mainstream parties. The only time they can work together is to keep third parties out, basically, is the only time they can ever agree on anything. So they set a very high bar that RFK Jr. doesn't appear to have met, but honestly, he got surprisingly close, which tells you the fact that he got 15% in any polls is really quite something we haven't seen in a long time for a third party candidate.
Yeah, that's true. It shows you that there are plenty of Americans out there that want change. I want to get your thoughts on what's been exposed out of Disney. A senior figure has let it slip that the company won't hire a white male.
Certainly, there have been times where, there's no way we're hiring a white male.
Just kind of unspoken.
There are times when it's spoken, but
how would they say it?
There's no way we're hiring a white male in this role. As far as Disney's concerned, I'm a white male, and that's not who they're looking to promote at the moment.
What's your reaction to this? Were you surprised?
Well, I wish I could say I was surprised. I unfortunately wasn't, but I certainly was horrified. Not only is this illegal and obviously immoral, it's wrong to discriminate against people because of their immutable characteristics in any direction, right? Whether it's the traditional discrimination or this new discrimination being done in the name of progress or wokeness or whatever, it's wrong. And it's actually also condescending and insulting to the minorities who are put in roles because many of them are probably perfectly capable of getting the job on their own merits, but instead they're being put in as tokens. And I think that's really insulting. And ultimately, look, I think most Americans want to live in an America like MLK Jr. famously talked about, right? Where people are judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. This kind of stuff, even if it's being done in the name of racial justice, doesn't take us closer to that. It reinforces the fact of race as a meaningful division between us and fuels intergroup resentment. But unfortunately, it's somewhat common. I mean, surveys of hiring managers show a alarming percentage think that this kind of DEI approach that is in many cases anti-white male and discriminatory in different ways is something, it's not just one instance at Disney. It's unfortunately becoming something of a common practice in businesses run by woke ideologues.
Well, it's good to see that this is actually being leaked and being exposed because, look, I'm all for equality. I want every female to have the exact same rights as every male, but I don't believe that white men should be discriminated against, and this is what we're seeing, and it's quite concerning that companies are jumping on the bandwagon because it's woke, and it's quite dangerous. Look, I want to get your thoughts on Julian Assange. He spent his first night in Australia as a free man, bringing his 14-year legal ordeal to an end. The WikiLeaks founder pleaded guilty to one charge of conspiracy and was sentenced to the time he'd already served in prison. What's the reaction been to this in the United States?
Well, it's really divided opinion, but I think on one hand, you have people who look at the fact that he exposed, unequivocally, he exposed U.S. war crimes that the government covered up, that nobody was ever held accountable for. And then you see this guy who some consider a journalist, some do not consider a serious journalist, but who published and revealed this information, and I will say did so in a reckless and haphazard way in many instances, right? He didn't take the kind of care that you see many journalists take to redact sources' names, to preserve intelligence. He just dumped it all out there. But there's also, so I can see the criticism of that. However, he's also been prosecuted under a law, the Espionage Act, that many First Amendment advocates believe is an unconstitutional law and should be challenged in court. And he spent years of his life in various forms of prison or purgatory for revealing war crimes where people were killed, where no one was ever actually held accountable for those. That has always struck a lot of Americans as a perverse injustice. And I can see why, even if Julian Assange is hardly, a perfect stand-up guy or a heroic figure in my books.
Based Politics podcast host Brad Polumbo. Great to have you on Power Hour. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.